Hi there. Thanks for tuning in. So I've made a video before on the best business podcasts, in my opinion, that I would recommend to others if they want to learn more about business and entrepreneurship. However, I want to make a video specific to podcasts about investing because there's quite a few podcasts on investing out there that I find are incredibly good. And I'm going to try and include a few podcasts with different investing styles. However, you will see a common theme with a lot of these, and it will tell you a little bit about how I personally like to invest. If you're like me and you can listen to a podcast during your day-to-day and learn a lot from it, then you will love some of these podcasts, especially some of them which allow you to go basically from knowing nothing about investing to being fairly comfortable doing it. So without further ado, let's start the list. And the number one podcast is Invested, Rule Number One Investing by Phil Town and Danielle Town. In this podcast, Phil Town, who's a fairly seasoned investor, has his daughter Danielle Town learn a bunch about investing. Basically, he teaches her everything he knows and goes over multiple principles of investing and even applies some current events as the podcast goes on in order to apply those things he's teaching to the current context. To me personally, the true MVP of the podcast is Danielle, because you are seeing the podcast from the perspective of someone who doesn't necessarily know much about investing, and she asks those questions that are, let's call them stupid questions, but in reality it's questions that we all have and we don't necessarily see answered out there, even if we Google them, because maybe they're too simple or people just are afraid to ask them because they don't want to seem stupid. But the thing is, Danielle asks those questions that we truly want to know, or even questions that we didn't know we had, but once she asked them, we realized this is actually great information. So yeah, if you're starting out on investing, you may want to check out the Rule Number One Investing podcast and just go in chronological order basically, because they have a lot of amazing episodes from the beginning to nowadays, and you will learn a ton from this podcast. Now, the second podcast I want to talk about is called Value Investing with Legends, and it's made by the Columbia Business School. What this podcast does is it grabs many legendary value investors and has deep, detailed interviews with them. So if you want to know about the philosophies of different value investors and also some background on their lives, why they do things the way they do, and a lot of technical details, then you may be incredibly interested in this podcast. They don't have that many episodes yet. However, the episodes that are there are fairly long and fairly interesting because the interviewers are people who are academics and knowledgeable about the subject, and they ask really specific technical questions, and I find that incredibly interesting. Now, number 3 is Chat with Traders by Aaron Fifield. If you're interested in trading, but also if you're interested in investing in general, I couldn't recommend Chat with Traders more. The thing about Chat with Traders is the host, Aaron Fifield, brings a lot of different guests to the show who have completely different strategies and have seen success in completely different ways in the stock market. And yes, most of them are traders, but a lot of them have wildly different ideas and wildly different methods to execute those ideas. So just from the diversity of guests and the number of episodes, I can simply recommend this podcast because you will learn something from some of the guests that you would have never even fathomed. And definitely if you're interested in doing things in the short term, maybe you will find someone who has a strategy that seems pretty good to you, and that way you can research more about this person, see how they do things, see how their track record is. So it's a great way to discover other investors that you could then look into. Likewise, the show notes that they have for many of these episodes are incredible. They sometimes attach even images of like exactly when someone bought and sold a certain stock over the course of a day or a week. It's incredibly helpful and is a great accompaniment to the rest of the show. Now, number 4 is technically a podcast that covers a lot of different topics, and that is the Investors Podcast by We Study Billionaires. Now, in the Investors Podcast, just like many of these other podcasts, they have a bunch of guests who invest and have had repeated success and have different methods and have different opinions and stuff going on. And I find that this podcast is incredibly interesting because it generally has a focus on value investing, but also brings all sorts of different guests and talks about, for example, the history of money, or how inflation affects very specific things, or how people look at commodities, or all sorts of interviews that are truly enlightening. And because the guys interviewing are in incredibly friendly terms with most of the people that they interview, you get a lot of personal details, you get a lot of details on morality and how people like to do things in a way deeper level. And I truly, truly love that. And they even have another podcast called Richer, Wiser, Happier, where they interview a lot of people who are incredibly successful and have been incredibly successful for decades now and have made millions and millions, even billions of dollars, and just how their life philosophy is, what they do with all their success, how they achieve that success, and what happens going forward. And I find that podcast is also incredible if you want to learn from some of the best minds in investing and business. However, the Investors Podcast itself is just so cool. One of my favorite episodes of the Investors Podcast is actually an episode where they brought in someone who is an academic on sleep, on exercise, and she works directly with a lot of managers on regulating their sleep schedules, their diets, their exercise schedules, and she gives you a lot of research-based things in order to improve your performance as a manager or as an athlete or whatever you need. But it's always based on science. And I love that episode. And that just shows the fact that it's not just about all investing all the time. It's also about history. It's also about science. And it touches on different topics which will make you a better investor, but aren't always necessarily about investing, about a stock price, about earnings, etc. Now on to number 5, which is called Focused Compounding. And this is one of my favorite podcasts. It's by Jeff Gannon and Andrew Kuhn. And boy, are they some of the smartest people I've ever heard. Something really cool about Focused Compounding is that the episodes are quite long. They can even reach up to 2.5, 3 hours, but they have a ton of Q&A where viewers may ask interesting questions, and Jeff and Andrew are going to answer them to the best of their abilities, and they go in very, very deep detail about all sorts of sectors, all sorts of metrics, all sorts of investment philosophies, or things you may want to know in specific scenarios. So it's incredibly cool because they do a really deep dive on, frankly, sometimes the randomest topics or the randomest industries or the randomest stocks, but it's amazing to see because they just go so deep that you will end up learning something. You will end up being more insightful from just listening to this podcast repeatedly because they are so freaking smart and answer so many questions in such a level of depth with such a level of research. It is truly amazing. And if you're a regular listener and you want to reach out to the host, there's a chance that just from tagging them on Twitter and asking a really good question, they will answer your question in a future episode, which is always a huge plus. Number 6 is a podcast called Dividend Talk. Now, obviously, as the name implies, this is focused on dividend investing, and it often has a lot of discussion related to stocks whose dividend dates are coming soon, or who have had recent dividend hikes or dividend cuts, or anything to do with dividends, really. What is cool though is that the hosts are based in Europe, so they actually give you a perspective of European stocks or the European stock market, which many podcasts don't give you because most of them are based in the US or have hosts who are based in the US. So it's really cool to have sort of that different exposure to stocks that aren't necessarily in the New York stock market. And besides, you also get those deep dives into companies. It's not just about the dividend they pay, but also what are the numbers behind that company that allows them to even pay those dividends in the first place. And it may even help you come up with different strategies if you are a dividend investor, and that really can help you for the long run. And last but not least, on number 7, we have all the podcasts by the Motley Fool. That includes Rule Breaker Investing by David Gardner. You have Industry Focus, or you have the Motley Fool Money. These are pretty good because you get updated news and updated perspectives on many tickers or stocks that have been circulating recently in people's minds or in people's trades. And you get to hear a lot of different voices just from the different people who work at the Motley Fool, who have different areas of focus or different stocks they're looking at or different industries that they can explain to you. So it's really cool, and I think you will like at least one of those podcasts, right? Even if you don't love all of them, there will be at least one that may be worth listening to and will give you something to learn. So that's it for today. That's all the podcasts I have, 7 investing podcasts. And if you want to see a list of the best business podcasts, in my opinion, that will also be linked down in the description. And since we're talking about investing, if you're interested in investing in the stock market, I highly recommend you to use Webull as your broker. Webull is a fantastic broker. It's incredibly quick, has an incredibly pretty UI, and I couldn't recommend it more. And if you sign up with a link down in the description, you will get 2 free stocks. That's basically risk-free return. With that said, don't forget to like and subscribe if you like the content of this video. It really helps me with the YouTube algorithm, and it makes me know that I should produce more content like this. Now with that said, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.